Welcome everyone, this is Alejandro Feige speaking. I'm one of the global directors and certified trainers for ICC. I welcome you all to this new edition of the International Coaching Community webinars, this time presenting a very interesting topic as the introduction to developmental tools for executive coaching uh, provided by Otto Laske, who I'm going to present in a minute. This webinar is really a special event because we are doing as a shared project between the International Coaching Community, ICC, and Interdevelopmental Institute run by Otto, as a shared commitment to bring topics or leading edge topics about taking coaching to next level. And developmental coaching is one way of living and seeing coaching that put us on a different level of listening and understanding the reality of our clients and actually our own reality. So I think you will see very interesting models during this hour that we are going to spend together. And we are also doing this webinar as an introduction to the course we are starting in October with Otto, where the full content and the full process will be explained and presented to develop the full executive coaching practice using developmental tools. So I welcome you all. Thanks for being here, maybe in the middle of the day. And I would like to know if you hear me well. So if the audio is okay, so please, can you raise your hand using the small hand icon you have on the webinar tool, just to let me know that everything is okay and the audio is doing well. So great, many thanks for the feedback. Seems that we are okay. Great, excellent, thank you all. So we are going to have first part of the webinar with Otto in terms of presenting topics, and then we are going to have interesting moments for question and answers at the end. So there will be time for everything. And just to complete my introduction, I would like to help Otto to know more about you. So I will run 3 polls on screen to gather some feedback or information from you that will help us to tailor the webinar today. So the first one is on screen, and it's what's your experience with coaching? We want to know what kind of relationship you have with coaching. Maybe you are new to coaching or studying coaching, or maybe you are a certified coach but not really working as a professional coach. Or the last one means I'm a professional coach and I work with executives, organizations, individuals, just to understand what's your position with coaching now, your current state. Great. So just choosing the option on screen, it's enough to send us your feedback, and we are going to share the results in a second. So great. Let me close this poll because it's about having a trend. So just for everyone to know, we have 54% more of the half of us. It's our certified coach, but not working intensively as coaches. 30% of us are professional coaches who already works with executives and organizations, and we have some people who's studying or even new to coaching. There are 9% studying coaching and 7% it's new to coaching. So for those who are new to coaching, it's a very good way to start understanding what coaching can do and what models are implied in a complete coaching process. So great. So that's one thing. The other question, it's what's your awareness about developmental coaching? If you have heard about developmental coaching before, maybe you heard about the name, but you really don't know what is it, or maybe you have an initial idea of what developmental coaching is, or you are studying developmental coaching, that can be, or work with a developmental coach as a client. Maybe you had experience of someone who's a developmental coach and then you work with them. Okay, great. So we are taking a few seconds more and we close the poll just to, again, to share the trend. Excellent. Well, we have about, most of us heard about developmental coaching, but we don't know really what is it. And maybe this webinar will be the ideal scenario to clarify that. So 68% it's in that situation now. The 26 have an idea of and heard about developmental coaching, so they have a rough idea of what is it. Someone is studying developmental coaching already, good for them, and others work with the developmental coach. So great also. The 2 and the 4% for the last two. Thanks, excellent. And just the last one, it's about what's important for you in this webinar. What do you want? What do you like to take out from this webinar? Maybe you are looking into this topic because of the interest of developing a new coaching practice, or maybe know about theory behind the developmental coaching. What's there in terms of models, or maybe the combination of two. Develop, know the theory and also build a new practice. Or even self-development. Maybe it's a way to self-development path for you yourself. Great, excellent. So we have a trend now. I will share that. So great. The most of you, it's looking forward to know both theory and practice of developmental coaching. Great. That's a good uh, good information. Also, some of you want to develop a coaching practice or know more about behind the theory behind. So, but the main thing is most of you are looking forward to know the theory and practice of developmental coaching. Great, great. So, excellent. I will. Then it's time to introduce Otto. Um, let me. I will open his microphone in a second. So, as I said, Otto is the founder of the Developmental Institute, and he's director of education and main structure. The institute is based on Gloucester in Massachusetts, United States. Well, he was working and teaching this model for more than 15 years, because he wants the coaches and consultants to take really a better advantage of the recent adult development research. And for that, he developed the constructive developmental framework. That's a methodology that it's given in various forms in all the courses and materials Otto teaches. You can find a good part of his work in two books that's names are Measuring Hidden Dimensions in Volume 1 and 2. Must say that the Volume 1 has also translation to Spanish for those who read Spanish. And also I invite you to read the another book that's recently launched, Dialectical Thinking for Integral Leaders, a primer. You can find them on the Otto's page, so we'll send that information also when closing the webinars and by a follow-up email. So enough of me, and then I think it's a time to welcome Otto to start then the session. So Otto, welcome and many thanks for being with us today to run this session.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Good day to you. My Spanish is beginning. It's still elementary, but I'm learning more and more every day. I'm very delighted to speak with you today. And I have heard a little bit about why you came and how much you know about developmental coaching. So my task today is to give you a little more detail about what I mean by that term and what it means to learn it and practice it. And I'm very pleased to do this in conjunction with the ICC, which I esteem very highly. So if you look at this page 2 here, what is developmental coaching? Coaching para desarrollo. As you will agree, all coaching has developmental effects. That means if we work with clients, they develop in some way. Their behavior changes, they may become better thinkers, and so forth. So here I distinguish between two kinds of coaching, behavioral coaching and adult developmental coaching, and the two really go together in my methodology, the marco de trabajo para el desarrollo constructivo. But what I will teach in the course and talk about here will not be behavioral coaching. So I mean by behavioral coaching, coaching where you focus primarily on behavior, on how the client behaves in a work environment or at home, whatever, and also what people do. And there is the big difference between behavioral and adult developmental coaching. Namely, in developmental coaching, this is the short term I will use, coaching para desarrollo. We don't look at behavior primarily. We look at how people make sense and make meaning of the world, and we call that a frame of reference, as I will explain. So by that, we focus on marco de referencia. And what is marco de referencia? Looking at clients this way really is a different view of what is a human being in relationship to developmental, to behavioral coaching. And I would say it's something like this. If you sit in front of a client or a team, let's take an individual client, the medium in which you communicate is language, and of course you are observing gestures and emotions and so forth, and we do that in developmental coaching too, but we pay great attention to the language because we think, or we can actually show through research, it has been shown that in language the adult person gives us insight into how they position themselves to others, which we call social emotional positioning, position socio-emocional. But they also, through their language and what they say to us, give us insight into the level of their thinking, and in particular, their cognitive development. And I refer to this as the client's self, sí mismo, in contrast to ego or ego. And so I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that is the first distinction I would make, speaking of the ego as the seat of behavior and the self as the origin of the marco de referencia or frame of reference. And as you see on this page at the bottom, of course the two go together. In other words, depending on somebody's frame of reference, he or she will behave this or that way. And I will explain that more by giving examples. So the important thing to understand about developmental coaching is that marco de referencia changes dramatically over a person's lifetime, particularly between 25 and 100. And so, you know, we have psychology of the infant, of the adolescent, but here I'm speaking about adults. And an adult, in my terms, is not just somebody who behaves, but who is at a certain level of development. And so if you look at this diagram here, what is development? What is adult development according to research? I think we can say that adult development has to do with the loss of egocentricity. That comes from Jean Piaget. Loss of egocentricity, what does that mean? It means you are losing over your lifetime, you are losing being focused on yourself. When you are a baby, or even an infant and a kid, you are, in my terms, a big subject. You are a big subject, meaning you are the center of the world. And for instance, the newborn has no object except him or herself. So the object of the newborn is very small. So we are starting as human beings with a big subject and a very small or non-existent object. And adult development consists of this movement, here shown as a movement downward, where the big S or subject becomes a small subject and the small object becomes a big object. And so what do I mean by object? What do I mean by big object? By big object, I mean that in your older age, you will think of yourself as a tiny speck in a huge universe that will continue after you pass. And that's a very different view of the world that you have than you have as a teenager in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And so you will become aware of your mortality, and your clients, the more mature they are, will not be a big subject, but they will be in a journey towards a very much smaller subject, losing egocentricity, being less and less focused on themselves, more and more focused on others, on the world, on the problems in the world, and what will be after you leave the world. And as they do that, as this adult development takes place, your object becomes bigger and bigger. So I can tell you that in 10 years, what you call the world will be much bigger than it is now. And so if you look back, if we look for a moment, if you look backwards, let me ask you this question. Can you think of something that you can do very well now that 5 or 7 years ago you could not do? Because that would indicate your development. If you can do something today that you couldn't do before, you see, development is not in time, it is across time. So if you go back 7 years to 2008, and you ask yourself, what can I do now that I couldn't do in 2008? Then you are speaking about adult development in yourself. I wonder whether any of you has an answer to that?
Just to help
There
you
doesn't,
with the
yeah?
interaction, then you can use the chat box to drop um, any comment to answer Joseph Otto's question.
Yes.
For example, Otto, I read for you. Eddie is saying, well, coaching. I just got certified in January, for example. Ileana
Yes.
says, I couldn't lead a team before.
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you. That suffices for now. So um, the first answer points to a skill that you achieved, that you learned, and now you're certified. I don't mean that so much because that's already the result of your adult development. The second answer about I couldn't lead teams as well serves me better at this moment because I can say yes. Probably that is due to your being able to listen better to the team or to conceptualize and understand the team better. I don't know exactly what it is, but that is more than a skill. I think that implies that your worldview or your frame of reference has changed. That's an hypothesis. And I think we can leave it at that for now and go on a little further. Thank you for the answers. So what I will teach in the October course, as you see in the next slide, is social, emotional, and cognitive coaching. I will not teach directly behavioral, but as I have told you, the two go together, and I will always deal with the relationship between the two. But what will be new for you will be the green circle. And so now I want to focus that more by saying that the course that I will teach for you will focus on executives. And not that what I will teach you is not useful for anybody, for everybody, including coaches, but I will focus it on executives, and I will tell you why. Executives are all adults, and they are at a particular level of adult development, like you are. And you know, by the way, that's a very important distinction between developmental and behavioral coaching, that we don't really distinguish between clients and coaches, because coaches develop as much as clients do. And if you have a coach who is not so well developed and has a client who is more developed, then we have a problem. So coaches need to be actually more highly developed than their clients, and I will show you that more. Now let me return to why do I deal with executives. On the next slide, I have 5 levels of working in an organization. And I will explain these now. You see, an organization is actually structured very much according to levels of cognitive development. If you think of a person being a janitor who looks over the building at night, and you compare that to a CEO of the company or a board member, you will agree that the janitor doesn't have to be a superb thinker. He just has to be reliable. Whereas the CEO or the board member has to be a very good thinker. And so developmental coaching is also different from behavioral coaching in this, that we very much want to know at what level of, at which of these 5 levels our client is residing. And so let me explain these 5 levels. Quality and service delivery means that your client is doing the best he can to do what he has always been doing, doing excellent work, delivering on time, making the right decisions at the right time, and so forth. So here at this level, we are all in the present. And for that level, behavioral coaching is fine. But as soon as we go beyond this level into optimization and differentiation and so forth, developmental coaching is very powerful, especially in combination with behavioral, but also by itself. So what do I mean by the second level? On the second level, just imagine the higher we go on these levels, the more does a person have to be developed as an adult, cognitively, social emotionally. And so at this second level, if you coach a manager, he is going to think about how he can optimize what his team is doing now and differentiate it from competitors in the market. So this manager that is your client, he will have moved out of the presence towards the future a little bit, just a little bit. But if we go further and go to the third level, to value streams and operational flows, by that I mean these are clients who are thinking about what value are we delivering to clients and how could we deliver better value. And for that reason, how could we restructure the operational flow in our organization as a whole? So you can see that people who take on these questions, they live in a particular universe of thinking that is very, very different from people at the second level or the first level. So you can say that each of these 5 levels has its own universe of discourse. And if you as a coach do not understand this universe of discourse, which is developmentally informed, you are not going to be a good coach. So what we call problems is much too general a term because the problems at the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth level are all very, very different. And so here we are at the third level, where a manager or a client of yours begins to think about improving the company as a whole and placing it in a better place in the market. That is requiring very good thinking, certainly. Then we go to the fourth level, which I call creating breakthroughs. And by breakthroughs, I mean we want to create a surprise. in the market. We want to turn the market around. So just think of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs created a breakthrough at Apple by redefining what a phone is. Up to now, the phone was just for communication, speaking to another person. Steve Jobs created a breakthrough by saying, no, the phone is about listening to music, viewing pictures, and communicating worldwide. And that's what I mean by creating breakthroughs. So if your client is a Steve Jobs, you won't get very far with behavioral coaching because you're not paying attention to how the client thinks and how he socially emotionally, which I will explain more, positions himself. And then if we go even a step further to new business modeling, which is also implied by what Steve Jobs did, he invented a new business model for selling phones. So I hope now you have somewhat of an idea of what these 5 levels are, at least in terms of level of cognitive development and quality of thinking. So you cannot really coach a client on level 2 the way you would coach a client at level 3 or 4 or 5. And if you do, you are actually doing harm to the person. You're not only being ineffective, because you are dragging down that person's thinking to your less developed level, and you'll probably lose the client. So it's very important for coaches to know at what level is my client and also at what level am I. And this can actually be very precisely assessed through CDF. I can make an assessment of you based on 2 one-hour interviews and tell you exactly at what level of cognitive and social emotional development you are. But I won't go into that. So I just wanted to explain that organizations are stratified in terms of cognitive development. And you as a coach, to be really effective, you want to understand that. And I will teach you more in the course and even now in this webinar about what that means. So let me summarize what I've said now. I have distinguished between development that is horizontal or in time and development that is vertical or across time. And I have said that behavioral coaching is here in the horizontal corner, and it's about the ego. But developmental coaching is about the self, sí mismo, and it's about what happens to a person in their consciousness and mind across time, which I think you will understand now is quite different. And of course, the two are influencing each other in that what happens in your mind across time or vertically will change your behavior. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example a little later. I want to give you an example of that. So here we go to CDF, which is the methodology. And here you see, I won't go into all the details down here, but I will say you see there is a social emotional self, sí mismo socio-emocional, and sí mismo cognitivo. And this is what I will be dealing with in the course on developmental coaching. And as you see, they are vertical, and the ego underneath the social emotional self is the ego that you have in your coaching been working with, which has to do with behavior. And the arrow here shows you that the ego is influenced by both aspects of the self. Now, we can go further into the ego as I do here. We can speak of the psychological needs of the ego, necessidades, or the superego, or the social reality, realidad social. And all of that comes, of course, up in coaching. But the focus here and in the course will be on how the self influences the ego. And I want to give you an example. If I make an assessment of you in terms of necesidades, superego, and realidad social, I can tell you about your self-conduct, your way of approaching tasks, your social emotional, your social intelligence. I can give you feedback on this on account of a questionnaire. And so let's say I'm finding that you are very strong in your convictions, okay, which is an aspect of self-conduct. So there are people that are very strong in their convictions. They don't like critique. They find it hard to deal with critique and so forth. So this is a character trait that actually will not change much over your lifetime. However, what will change is that through the development, the desarrollo socioemocional and cognitivo, you will handle that having convictions very, very differently as you mature, as you become 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So there is the influence of development on behavior. The behavior is changed because the ego is in constant contact with the self. Now, that's, I think, all I can say to that now, so that you see the connection. So what we are doing in developmental coaching is we are now looking at the ego from a higher level perspective, and we are saying, how is this ego changing over the lifetime, over the time, over time, across time? And that's a new point of view in coaching. Now, what is desarrollo socioemocional? You can see it here. This is a theory by Keegan, which I have refined. You can see the etapas: impulso, instrumentalisto, dependiente de otros, autocreación, consciente de sí mismo. These levels, this is the low level, 1, and 5 is the high level, and between them are 4 intermediate levels. They are here shown to be defined by enfoque on yo and enfoque on otros. So in other words, as you develop social emotionally, you go from being focused on yourself to being focused on others, and you go back to focus on yourself and to others, but in a different way. And so while you are focused on yourself here at S4 and also at S2, that happens in a very different way. And so you, right now, you are somewhere in between, I would think, between 3 and 4. You are somewhere here, and I could assess that more precisely and give you feedback on that. But what is meant is this. All our life, we as humans are focused on wanting to be autonomous and independent of others, and at the same time we want to be part of a community, enfoque on otros. And so we are always in conflict about how much do we want to focus on being ourselves and how much do we want to be accepted by others. And this is actually the social emotional development that takes place. So for instance here at S3, dependiente de otros, a person, your client, and you as a coach as well, you define yourself as being dependent on others internally. So your teachers, your parents, your colleagues are internal voices in you, and they determine what you do. And if you lose a group you are part of, you are lost because you have not yet created your own identity. And so most coaching clients and coaches, I would think, are between 3 and 4. They are struggling to become autonomous. And you can look at coaching as a tool of society to make it possible for people in the population to move from being other-dependent, dependiente de otros, to self-authoring, as we say in English. So it is this stretch of adult development that coaching is about. Now there is coaching that goes beyond that and goes from 4 to 5, and that's very high caliber coaching. Now, and so I would think that people who work on these upper levels that I show you here, they are here, and here. they are between 4 and 5. But the people who work at the first and the second and maybe the third level, they are between etapa 3 and etapa 4. And so, you know, that's why this level, this distinction of levels is important socially, emotionally also, because of course, cognitive development goes together with social emotional development. So most likely, nobody who is not developed to S4 autocreation can function at this upper level. So that's what I'm saying, that we need to keep these levels into account. Now, here briefly is a marco de referencia across all the etapas, and let me just point to one issue here. Here we have level of self-insight, insight into oneself. At level 2, which I haven't talked about much, insight into yourself is very low, but as you see, it rises to moderate in level 3, to high in level 4, and to very high in level 5. That means the higher you go social emotionally, the more aware you are of yourself in relationship to others and in relationship to yourself. And so here, up here, you see in red, you see these percentages, and you can see that most clients and coaches, 55% are at level 3, and only 25%, according to empirical research, are at level 4, and less than 10 are at level 5. And so our society is also stratified, just as organizations are, that the higher you develop, the fewer colleagues you have. Now let's go to thinking. Thinking. What is thinking? Well, it's much more than what happens in your head. And as I show here, we have to distinguish between posición personal, herramientas, and experiencias. And what I mean here is that depending on the social emotional stance you are taking, the posición personal, you will have certain tools available, cognitive tools, herramientas, which you can use, which will create your experiences. And so depending on what stance you take and what tools you use, your experiences at work and in life will be different. And these experiences, they feed back into the tools you use and the position you take. And so the more highly developed you are in your stance, the more tools you will have and the more deep and rich will be your experiences. And that's what we are working on in developmental coaching. And actually, how this happens, I cannot explain in great detail here, but you see from this diagram, the desarrollo cognitivo, that from logical thinking in adolescence here, we are moving towards pensamento dialéctico in 4 phases, which have been researched and can be empirically assessed. And so you can see that the development from logical thinking to dialectical thinking takes time and practice. And that will be dealt with in the second part of the course I will start in October. So we have to think, let me see, yeah, we have to think desarrollo cognitivo and socio-emocional together, okay? And I can't say too much about the relationship here, but they are very, very closely linked, by which I mean that if you are cognitively developed, let's say in phase 2, you might be higher developed socially emotionally or lower, and very rarely at the same level. So we always in clients have the gap, and in yourself as a coach, we have this gap between social emotional and cognitive development. They don't always go together. So if I have a client who is social emotionally very highly developed but not cognitively, I do cognitive coaching because that's what the client needs. If it's the other case, that somebody is socially emotionally less developed, having to do with how they relate to people, I do social emotional coaching. And the expert developmental coach is somebody who knows how to go from social emotional to cognitive coaching, depending on the situation of the coachee, at the right time, at the right moment. So that is mastery of this, that you can think both of them together. Now let me summarize a little bit here. I want to stop shortly speaking. What I've told you about developmental coaching has to do with challenging frame of reference or marco de referencia, by which I mean challenging how people make meaning of their relationship to others and how they make sense of the world cognitively. And so that's what I would say a developmental coach has to do. He or she is going to challenge his or her client's frame of reference and indirectly thereby their behavior. And so while up to now you have directly focused on behavior, you will learn in developmental coaching to do that indirectly, which in a way is much more powerful because development determines behavior or how it shows up. And so that's how I would summarize what I've said, that we are dealing not with behavior, but with marco de referencia in developmental coaching. Now, all of this, what I've said, is also applies to teams, equipos. And here you see a picture of two teams. One is a sports team and the other is an executive team. And let's assume that the sports team is cognitively or has a much easier task in following a routine operation, what they always do. And so, of course, we wouldn't coach an equipo like this in the same way that we coach an executive team or a board of directors, because these people, each of them, they are probably very differently developed, each of them. And the boss, who may be this person, may actually not be the most highly developed, and that may be a problem in the team because they could work much better together if he or she were more developed. So we have to work on that. And so this team, we have to get to know socially, emotionally, and cognitively, and then decide what kind of coaching does this team need. And inside the team, what kind of coaching do each of these people need? Because maybe Rick, he was here, Rick perhaps needs needs cognitive coaching, but maybe Bob here needs social emotional coaching. And so we are good coaches when we can figure that out, and there are assessments that can help us. But I think the course I'm teaching will also give you the first step towards making an informal evaluation of your clients, much better than you can do now. And then your team coaching will, I think, become much more effective. So let me conclude by saying that coaches are effective to the extent that they are themselves developed as adults. Ultimately, you know, coaching skills don't matter. You can always learn more coaching skills. That's not the point. What matters is how developed you are in using them. How developed are you as a coach, socially, emotionally, and cognitively to use the tools you use? And so in developmental coaching, another difference from behavioral coaching is that we are focusing strongly on self-development. In my teaching, I want to develop the coaches as persons in their self-development. And my experience has been that if you study this kind of developmental coaching, that in itself will help you to develop as an adult, because you learn about etapas, you learn about phases of cognitive development, and it has an impact, as you can ask my many students. They will be glad to tell you. So essentially, that's what I wanted to tell you today, to give you an inkling of an idea of developmental coaching. And so in the course that starts in October, I will begin with social emotional coaching and development, and then in the second part go to cognitive coaching. I want to thank you for your attention and Alejandro for his introduction and presence. And if there are questions now, I will be glad to answer them.
Many thanks, Otto, for this introductory uh, introduction to these interesting topics. So yes, we received some questions through the chat, and we invite you, if you have any, to type the questions on the chat. That would be great, so we can read the question and share with everyone. So here goes the first, from Isabel. How can we understand better our our on our client status, the actual diagnostic, in what concerns social emotional development, in order to draw a developmental program, for example?
Uh, I understand the question to be how, through studying social emotional development and coaching, we develop ourselves. Is that correct?
It's actually how we can make a diagnostic or get our clients, ourselves, and client status, current status of development.
Yes. Okay, so this is a question about assessment, right?
Yes, for example, to make a developmental program for them or with them.
Y- Yes. Well, the developmental, I do this all the time with my clients. I don't coach anybody of whom I have not made an assessment. And once I have made an assessment, which is based on 2 one-hour interviews, I write a feedback report and I develop a coaching plan for that client, which we then uh, negotiate and agree on. Now, I think that after the first introductory course that I will teach, you won't be able to make an assessment. But this is how the assessment goes, that we do what is called a semi-structured interview that determines, let's say the outcome of the assessment could be that you are that you are in the middle between level 3 and 4, social emotionally, and that cognitively you are in phase 2 of pensamiento dialectical. So on the basis of this, and there's much more material in detail for that, I can work out a coaching plan and I can present it to my client and and we can then agree how we want to develop our coaching sessions over the next 3 or 6 months. So my coaching is assessment-based. I call that evidence-based developmental coaching, not just developmental coaching. And those who cannot yet do the assessment, which can already be learned, which can always be learned, they will have to be satisfied with some informal assessment, I would say, which of course has its risks, and we can talk about that more later.
Many thanks, Otto. We go for then another question. Just clarification for everyone. We are going to send you an email with the link to the recording. So we are not, you will share exactly the recording of this webinar with you afterwards, okay? So that being said, the next question is from Margarita. She's asking, but the development in executives is related to the way that he or she is able to develop the others and let them go through the possibility to grow and to have also the humility to know that some of the people can teach them a lot.
Yes, I would agree with you, Margarita. Um, Wherever somebody works with a team, or even if it's just collaborators in a department, that person is indeed in charge of developing other people. And so I think it's evident that such a person has to be highly developed, him or herself, to be able to do that. And so when people complain about, I can't get along with my boss and my boss is not really doing much for me, then they are saying, my boss is not a developed adult. He is perhaps less developed than I. And I have heard that many times that clients have told me, I'm very unhappy in my work because my boss is less developed than I. And so that is a major issue in companies, that often somebody becomes a manager or a team leader who is less developed than the members of the team. But as a developmental coach, you can have an influence on the company. You can, for instance, propose that managers undergo a developmental assessment and that they undergo developmental coaching. And then they will be much better leaders and managers. I don't know whether I answered your question, but that, that is what came to mind.
Many thanks, Otto. And here is a question: what CDF stands for? What the name CDF stands for?
Okay. CDF is an abbreviation for Marco de Trabajo para el Desarrollo Constructivo. And I want to explain that. It's the constructive developmental framework. I can't go back in my slides, so I will do that without. I call the methodology constructive developmental framework because the assumption is that each of us constructs his own worldview, which means your world and my world are fundamentally different because you have a different model of the world. You have constructed it differently on account of your history, your upbringing, your education, the society you are in, the work you do, your psychology, all of that. And the theory I'm teaching and the model I'm teaching all has to do with this assumption that individuals construct their own social emotional model and cognitive model of the world. And so when I spoke of frame of reference, what I really also meant is changing that model. Because if I coach you social emotionally, you will change your model of what is the social world and how you operate in it and how far you can rely on yourself and not rely on yourself and so forth. I will make you aware of all the hindrances that you presently have to be the most effective and authentic person that you can be. And so that's the notion of, that's the meaning of the term constructivo. It's a mental construction that we all undertake. I don't know, I hope that's somewhat of an answer.
Thanks, Otto. So, in order to be in good shape with the time, if you agree, we go for the last two questions, and I'm sure many of other questions could be addressed during the course itself or through your books too. So,
Yes.
the next question is from Daniel. He's asking, development depends on generation level. For example, millennials are more developed.
I didn't quite understand that acoustically. Who is more developed, Alejandro?
The millennials, the generation of millennials.
Why would they be more developed?
It was, I don't know why. It's just a question from Daniel.
Okay, I understand. You spoke about generations.
Yes.
Okay, let me say this, generations. What I say has nothing to do with generations.
Okay.
Because the millennials, they are less developed than I am because I'm older, and they are much younger. And although it's not entirely a business of age, if I made an assessment of different millennials, they would all be at different developmental levels, socially, emotionally, and cognitively. So you cannot think in terms of groups as generations. No, it has to do with the individual. has to do with the individual, not with generations. Okay?
Yes, excellent, Otto. So let me find out the last question then.
Yeah.
Let me try to do this one. How can it be assessed that this developmental coaching made the participants effective?
Okay. There is effectiveness is in a way a very shallow term. It's undefined. It depends on the organization. For instance, depending on the level, I showed you 5 levels of organizational responsibility. Effective means something very different. If you are a janitor, you are effective in a different way than when you are a board member. So the term effective doesn't say anything. We could refine the term effective if we knew what level we are talking about, what universe of discourse of the person we are talking about. But in itself, effectiveness is undefinable. So how can you reformulate your question? Or Alejandro, could you maybe repeat the question for me?
Yes, the literal question, maybe Young Shin could rewrite the question again, but what I read literally is, how can it be assessed that this developmental coaching made participants effective? So
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. I think you are asking about coaching research. How, if we coach somebody developmentally for a year and we measure his or her effectiveness before the coaching and after the coaching, you are asking, can we show that through developmental coaching, somebody has become more effective? Now let's assume there is some measure of effectiveness at his or her level of responsibility that makes sense to use. How can we then show that? Now there is this difference between behavioral and developmental coaching, that developmental coaching does not take effect immediately, but is, as I said, across time and longitudinally, so that if you coach some person for a year, the effects of that coaching are not entirely developed at the end of the year, but it may take 1 or 2 years for that person to become fully effective because development takes time. You don't go from one etapa to another in a year. You need at most 2 years to show cognitive development or social emotional development. Maybe a year in some cases, but and so that makes coaching research regarding developmental coaching very different, because the effects of developmental coaching are lifelong and they do not immediately take effect, even if you could measure the effectiveness. But I would also say, despite this, that what you could probably assess after a coaching ends, let's say after a year, would be that this person actually, when you talk to him or her, conveys a different cognitive understanding of the world, which may translate into effectiveness or may not, depending on the person's psychology. And he or she may also relate differently to other people, social emotionally. So, there is no direct relationship between self and effectiveness. There is also no direct relationship between ego and effectiveness. That's what I would say. So you have to use the term effectiveness with a grain of salt.
many thanks, Otto. So just a quick comment. FOR, it's frame of reference for
Yes, yeah, marco de referencia, FOR.
FOR. Yes, frame of reference. So Claudia is asking if in the course that we are going to take in October, will you be able to do the assessment at the starting the course and then at the end of the course? about the developmental level.
I could, but I would have to be paid for that. It's not part of the course.
Okay, it's a different process.
It's a
Assessment.
different process.
Yes, great. So that's the answer then. Um, excellent then. So I think we are reaching to our end of today's session, and with permission of all participants, we are going to send a follow-up email with the link to the recording and also the link to the information about the course. We have also a special um, discount for those who register for this webinar that may be a benefit for you if you are interested in taking the course. And we expect to see you there because we believe on the importance of the development of coaches first, mainly in order to do a responsible execution of our practice. So we hope to see many of you in the course. That will be really an interesting story. And then just want to thank you, Otto, for the time and the openness of the of this webinar, and leave you then with the final words to close the session.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.
Thank you then. See you in the next session then. Take care.
Take care.